It's so bad in our community that we actually have our brightest and most educated among us freezing eggs as opposed to saying, what do I need to do to work on myself so that I can find a suitable mate to pair bond with and for us to get married and have children? They are bypassing the man and they're like, I'm okay. I've heard it quoted. They're like, I'm okay with, not being a wife. If I just die and I die not being someone's wife, I'm fine with that. But I can't bear the thought of not being a mom. And so what women are doing, particularly in our community, they're actually freezing their eggs and they have every intent on having the baby without the father on purpose. Did you wanna speak to that? Have you heard about that? Are you familiar with the documentary called Eggs Over Easy? Have you heard anything about that?
I've not heard that, but it doesn't surprise me because here's why. Um, so what we're seeing is the overflow and the progression of the feminist movement.
Mm,
I don't need no man, right?
right.
And so one of the things, if you saw in my book, that I tried to unpack was the things that were actually fueling the father absence pathology in the black community, which it started with the welfare state. So we can get into that and talk about, because there are people who they're welfare state deniers. They don't
Are they?
understand how, oh, there's welfare state deniers. They don't believe, they don't understand what impact that had, right? But we
So
can
let's go ahead
unpack
and
that.
talk about that. I want to go let's just go straight into it.
Okay,
It sounds like you need to lay that
sure.
groundwork if you're saying that there are people who actually deny that welfare state.
Right. So like they would say the welfare state exists. They understand that there are individuals in the black community that are on welfare. You know that it is a there's a, at one point a lot of poverty in which a lot of black African Americans, because of whatever the economic state that impacted the black community, that many African Americans went to the went to the government, right?
Right.
And single mothers. So here's how that happened though. So go back a little bit. You talk about the 30s, the 20s, 30s, and 40s,
Yep.
when black families were actually intact. There was a time period that people don't understand. They look at the 70 to 75% father absence we see right now going on, but they don't realize that. And so, and so what they use is it's racism and white supremacy that's breaking up the black family. But no, that's not it. So I mentioned Robert Woodson. So he talked about a history back straight out of slavery after the Emancipation Proclamation. There was a census and there was research and data taken that they looked at various plantations of where slaves were,
Mhm.
and all of this data samples that they have, 85% of the families of blacks coming right out of slavery were intact with a mother and father in the home.
So this is right out of slavery.
Right out of slavery,
Ancient slavery.
85%.
Okay.
85% of the sample size that they took from the plantations they went to, the places they visited, the states where they went in the South, blacks had intact families. They were rushing to get married right out of slavery because many of them were separated. Remember that the fathers were taken out of certain places. People shipped off, kids were shipped off, and they were desperate to get their families together. So families were, and there was a migration of the black family, a mass migration to get toward marriage to solidify our family. So slavery didn't break us up. Slavery drew us together.
Right.
There was the Judeo-Christian values that slaves had. They flocked to that, and that anchored them. And so we go from the early 1900s to 1920s to where you saw black flourishing. Did you watch Uncle Tom too?
Of course I
You know what
did.
I'm saying? And they showed those images and pictures of blacks where we were doing well in terms of, there was still racism, overt racism in America. There was segregation. There was Jim Crow that was on that was coming, all those things, hatred, racism, lynching, things like that. But in the midst of that, black people were their families and homes were intact at a rate. It was like the teenage pregnancy rate among white girls was higher than it was among black girls at one time.
Mhm.
The rate of families to get, like, it was like less than 10%. It was unheard of. 90%, 85 to 90% of black children growing up in America at one time had dads and mothers in the home. So anyway, let's go forward. So then what happened then? What happened? Thomas Sowell, you mentioned him. Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams codified in their writings and their works that blacks, on the heels of our families being more intact at any point in time that it's ever been in America. That poverty went from 87% in the 1920s to 47%. That was a 40% decline in poverty among blacks. That was the deepest or the steepest decline in poverty that we'd ever seen on record among blacks. We're doing well in the midst of a very racist America. So then by the 1960s, that's when Patrick Moynihan begins to write, because he saw that some of the urban areas in the nation began to see more poverty in the urban areas where there were some blacks being able to congregating from the South, and he saw something burgeoning that was familiar to him because he was Irish, and that same pathology happened to the Irish community at one time in America. There were
So
Irish ghettos. Go ahead.
let me recap. So basically, you're saying post-slavery, Reconstruction, Black intact families are high.
Mhm.
Fast forward to the 1960s, you had a lot of Black migration from the South up to the North.
Mhm.
And what Moynihan noticed in the North was when you've got this urban influx,
Yep.
right? Let's just say certain depravity starts to ensue and it causes breakdown of family. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what's happening there. And
Okay.
so what he saw was, at the time, 1960s, 25% of black kids were growing up without dads. And you say, whoa, that, like, man, that's way lower than what it is today, right?
Right.
But that was a shocking, alarming thing to him then, because the average American, that was less than 10%.
Right.
Right. And what he also said was that blacks who were actually, in the middle class didn't see those same problems. The middle class black folks, they weren't seeing this father absence issue because they were working, they were in the home and they still had intact families. What he saw was that subgroup of blacks that was a growing group started having problems. And he said, this is going to lead to more crime. So how did he know that? Again, because he saw that in the Irish community himself. And Patrick Moynihan grew up without a dad. A lot of people didn't know that.
Ah.
He himself grew up without a dad. And so anyway, he said, listen, Houston, we have a problem, because this is going to get bad. I've seen it happen before, and it's going that way. Well, lo and behold, he brings this to Lyndon B. Johnson, his leader at the time, right? The leader, the Democrat, right?
Come on.
He brings it to Lyndon Johnson. He was the leader of the free world at the time, and he said, okay, we got to bring a war on poverty. And let me tell you something that's interesting that Lyndon Johnson actually said. Lyndon Johnson said this, quote, "The family is the cornerstone of our society. More than any other force, it shapes the attitudes, the hopes, the ambitions, and the values of the child. And when the family collapses, it is the children that are usually damaged. When it happens on a massive scale, the community itself is crippled. So unless we work to strengthen the family, to create conditions under which most parents will stay together, all the rest, schools, playgrounds, and public assistance and private concerns, will never be enough to completely cut the circle of despair and deprivation." And so I'm going to bring that point up again, end quote. I'm going to bring that point up again later, and I'll tell you why that's important. Go ahead.
So
You want to say
hold up.
something?
So Lyndon B. Johnson actually admits on record that family is the cornerstone of a healthy society, right? But yet, his solution
You,
to
you tracking with me,
our
right?
his solution to our problem was, okay, I have the great society. Here's the welfare state, but it comes at a cost.
There it
It's gonna
is.
cost you.
So let's see what the cost is.
Go
So
ahead.
he said, this poverty problem, we're going to attack it. We got a plan.
Mm,
Here's our strategy. We're going to institute the welfare state, and there's always been public welfare. There's always been social welfare. Welfare focused or functioned as a means of getting people repaired and on their feet until they were able to do something on their own. That was
right.
the purpose of welfare. It wasn't meant to keep people in a culture of dependence upon
Okay.
government, right? So then what it became was they were saying, we want to get more blacks in the welfare program. So
Mhm.
they intentionally targeted the black community by saying, listen, women, right? We will give you a check